Hello, and welcome to another episode of What's Your View? I'm Sumayyah Simone,
And I'm Dr. Sheila Ealey.
and thank you for watching today. We have a very exciting topic. So, there's a video that went out a little while ago with a theory talking about snake venom. Now, if you know, you know, and if you don't know, you want to go to myblackhealth.com and look at the show notes. We'll link you to that video. So, go to myblackhealth.com. Look in the show notes. There'll be a link there and you can click to see what we're talking about. Otherwise, if you know, you know. And so we're going to have a conversation with our very own Dr. Christina Parks.
Good
Welcome, Dr.
morning.
Parks.
Good afternoon.
Good, right.
It was
So,
27 degrees and snowing here in Michigan, so
oh wow.
yeah, it was
Oh yeah,
not good.
that's not my kind of weather.
So thankful for the 77 degrees we have here.
In Texas, right?
Don't go there. I'm not feeling it today.
This is your hometown. You know what it feels like.
So, Dr. Parks, yours, I've seen many responses to it, and I've had people ask me what I thought of it. But yours was actually the best, very extremely well thought out response. And I'd like you to share it here with our audience. So we'll say a little bit about what we're talking about, right? There's a theory floating around that COVID symptoms look an awful lot like a snake venom bite, right? Like the same symptoms that you would get if you were bitten by a venomous snake. Am I describing that right?
Possibly, yes. That it could be venom poisoning.
Right. And so you responded to that and you were like, you had a whole different, like, give us your response.
Well, I think that, obviously there are neurotoxic peptides within snake venom that make you really sick if you're bitten by a snake. But we have been looking at things like venom or even whether it's spider venom or snake venom or different things that come from different organisms or animals for their use as a pharmaceutical or medicinal for a long time. So, for instance, it wouldn't even be out of the realm to use a peptide that was in snake venom as a positive medication if it blocked a certain activity that was bad or did something that you wanted, or even numbed an area or something like that as an analgesic. So that's the kind of thing that scientists are doing all the time, identifying functional regions of things and then actually seeing if they have a pharmaceutical endpoint. So with that said, if this virus was engineered, and there's a lot of evidence that suggests it very well could have been, they've been creating chimeric coronaviruses. Xi Lee and Dr. Richard Barrick have been doing that for over a decade. So with that kind of background, it obviously is a no-brainer to think that they might incorporate elements that are highly toxic or whatever it would be, and that they would look to things like snake venom. There's people who have alleged that it has an HIV motif in it. So, I say things like alleged because although there's support, what real science does is we get top experts and we do a lot of studies and then we keep studying it, right? Because there's been such censorship and such shutdown of academic freedom, we really haven't been able to engage this at every level. And so some people are afraid to speak up and say, hey, this is what's going on, because maybe there's only one paper, there's only 2 papers on it right now. But that's because of this lack of academic freedom. I think we should take these hypotheses seriously. And the thing is, I don't have any problem with the hypothesis. I think it was a little bit over dramatized because it really wouldn't be surprising. I think the bigger issue is this an engineered virus? And is this biological warfare? And is the virus intended to be the weapon, or is the vaccine intended to be the weapon? Right? And those are questions that need to be asked. The fact that they're not being asked just means that we're ignoring the obvious.
And the other thing is, for me, we don't have we don't have independent studies. We need independent studies outside of the pharmaceutical industry. How are we ever going to know the truth if we're banned to do the studies outside of what they give you, the papers that they give you?
Right.
Well, there's many different labs, but essentially almost all labs are funded directly or indirectly by the NIH, by the US government. And so if you pursue, and then there's actually some good science being done on many different aspects of coronavirus and the spike protein, but nobody wants to speak on it publicly because, especially the scientists, because if they speak publicly on their own work, then they probably will lose funding, right? So it's an environment of censorship. But the bigger issue is, so the whole snake venom sort of like doesn't deal with the central issue, which is, one, what is going on? Are we at war? Right? And things like, even like Ukraine, is that just part of this global war? Things like people are posting that different food distribution and food producing facilities are being destroyed. You know, what is the underlying agenda here? And so if you're looking at health, because I know this person was promoting, he was used to be against monoclonal antibodies, which I've always been, I don't want to say an advocate for, but positive to, because usually they're very purified and the cost benefit is way in terms of benefit and very little in terms of cost for that particular modality. Now he's on board with it because he says it as an antidote, but of course he doesn't realize that when anti-serum used to be used, there were like a plethora of negative side effects for using horse anti-snake venom, or, you know, because it was complicated. But now we've perfected that technology almost. So the monoclonal antibodies, I was never against. I would have given them to my parents, or had them, you know, told them to go get them. I'm not a doctor, not an MD. But the bigger issue is, if it's coming to our health, what are bigger issues? And there are bigger issues. And so there's two that I outlined in my article. And the one is that we've been growing live viral vaccines in animal cells for like over 50 years, probably for close to 70 years. It started with the polio vaccine. And we've been growing them in kidney cells that don't lack antiviral defenses. And this appears to have resulted in the spread of animal viruses into the population. And so this is, again, an area that they will not take seriously. There are a few research studies on them, but not enough to say definitively. But the truth is, it's a no-brainer to know that this is happening, right?
Yeah.
That these cells, and then they were, because they're a live viral vaccine, they're not sterilized, they're not killed. And so, you know, the polio or the MMR or the varicella that are live viral vaccines were then just injected into millions of people. And so, have we been creating our own pandemics? Is it more likely that HIV came from, you know, and again, it's always some black person beating in the heads of a monkey and eating their brain, some primitive person, as opposed to the fact that they grew the polio virus in monkey and chimpanzee kidney cells and then either injected or gave the oral polio vaccine to millions of Africans. Like, what is more likely for the spread of SIV, simian immunodeficiency virus, to become, and it could have recombined with other viruses that were there, other viruses that were present in the humans. There's so much that could have occurred here, and there's some evidence for maybe what did occur. But again, like, one person's data isn't enough. We needed large-scale investigation. But because of the consequences of this, we know in the U.S. the virus wasn't SIV. It was SV40. It was, again, a simian virus because they were grown in vero cells, which were monkey kidney cells, lacking viral defenses. And so SV40, which I learned about in graduate school, is the prototypical cancer-promoting virus. I did not learn that it contaminated the polio vaccine because, again, they were grown in these monkey kidney cells. It's a monkey virus. And now it's endemic in humans, and it's associated with a large number of cancers.
So wait a minute, you didn't learn that? You learned about the SV40, but you didn't learn that it was actually in the vaccines?
No, nothing about polio, nothing about the polio. You know, like, I didn't know where it came from at all. Like, you know, you don't, you know, when you're in a classroom, a lot of times you don't ask those questions. You don't think to ask them. Right. And that's why our schooling is so one-dimensional.
Exactly.
But then, of course, when I heard about it, I was like, SV, simian, yeah, it all fits together. And that's why my background allows me to put the pieces together, you know, and so there are so many things, like, have we created our own pandemics by allowing all of this transfer of viruses and genetic information? And so, you know, this idea of viral integration, there was a paper that came out, and it was done in vitro in sort of cancerous or protocancerous liver cells, where they showed that the vaccine actually upregulated a particular enzyme that helps to integrate viral DNA into your DNA. And this sounds like science fiction to many people, but those of us, I knew in 1990 that viruses integrate into our DNA, that we have an operating system that has kind of like viral DNA, and that new viruses can integrate because it actually allows the species to adapt. But this is supposed to happen slowly. Our bodies are actually meant to do this. If the virus is bad for you, if it's deleterious, your body will actually silence it. And so when you hear about people having reactivated Epstein-Barr virus, reactivated this, reactivated that, it's because their body's no longer silencing it for some reason. And because now we have increased the amount of viral transfer, just almost like exponentially probably compared to what it was before we started growing all of these vaccines in different types of cells and injecting them. Because even human cells, if we grow the vaccines in human cells, we also are going to get human retroviruses or any other viruses that the human cells may have. And so this is an issue that really needs to be looked at. And I think that's one of the reasons with the new coronavirus injections, they went to a cell-free system to try to avoid this problem. But it's a new technology, so it's going to come with its whole host. So this idea that there are all of these viruses that may be integrating into the human genome, and it appears that this vaccine upregulates these injections upregulate an enzyme that helps them integrate. Now, whether that was intentional or unintentional or what, it remains to be seen. How much of this is happening in the human body remains to be seen, but you would have liked to have known before you injected every man, woman, and child in the US and possibly on Earth what's going on. And so how much capacity does our genome, does our DNA have to silence this? And what if it gets into our germ cells, our eggs, and our sperm? What potential ramifications does that have? So to me, this is a central issue, and this issue of silencing those viruses. It's an issue of epigenetics. And our body has mechanisms, but we don't understand them very well. So
let me ask you something. When you say what if it gets into our germ cells, what do you mean?
So we know that there's some papers, and I can possibly pull one and give it to you, that show that an egg will actually take up exogenous. That means RNA. Exogenous means from somewhere else. So from outside of itself. Okay. So if you put an egg cell in culture, or in, if you're doing in vitro or whatever, or even possibly in the body, and you surround it with exogenous RNA, it will take it up and it will actually integrate it into the genome. This may be some mechanism for possibly providing more genetic diversity. I don't really know what God intended when He, allowed this mechanism, but never in the course of human history have we ever had a scenario where you're actually flooding the system with this mRNA that codes for a toxic viral protein, right? So if you think about viruses, the way that I see it, originally were intended by God for something totally different probably. And one of the things is for information transfer. It allows for information transfer within the cell, within the DNA, between cells, and actually within species. You can transfer genetic information. And so that allows a certain amount of adaptability and that sort of thing. But it was in certain bounds. And now we're sort of outside of those bounds into this free-for-all where we've just overloaded the system with all of these viruses to the point, and all of this toxic mRNA that may actually be taken up by our eggs and, of course, our sperm as well. And it can be integrated into the baby's DNA. So their DNA is now functionally changed forever.
And yet they want to vaccinate. They want permission to do emergency use in 5 to 11-year-olds. You talked about the simian 40 virus, and all of us baby boomers who had that sugar cube for polio, we were recipients of that. We have the highest rate of cancer now of any other group.
And they actually, I think they did find that those who actually took the sugar cube fared better, because actually your intestinal barrier and that sort of thing, you have an immune system there that's actually better at making sure that didn't get through. But even those, it was supposed to be a killed vaccine,
Mm-hmm.
But we know that a lot of people got polio from it. So we know that there were many batches that were not inactivated properly. And so in those batches, not only did they get polio virus that could have caused problems, they may have gotten live SV40 as well.
That's
So
right.
the implications for injecting the live virus are far, 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 far worse than for taking the live virus going through your intestinal system, because we see viruses all the time. So for those that the vaccine may not have been properly inactivated for, it's going to be really much more devastating. And that's probably the core group that it spread from.
Well, they didn't throw them away. They didn't throw those sugar cubes away. They just dumped them into the poor communities.
Or to third world nations, which is what they did with BTP when they found out that that was causing too high a level of seizures and other neurological issues. They moved it to Africa, where they found that it causes between 5 and 10 times the mortality in kids who get it, and the WHO is still giving that.
And so the majority of us, we ended up with a load of retroviruses. I remember a virologist told me years ago, after looking at my blood work, she said, your retroviruses are so high, it's not going to surprise me if you end up with cancer.
Right.
It's like a ticking time bomb waiting to happen. I forgotten she ever told me that. I just said, oh, okay, because I practice the power of positive thinking, and I just let stuff like that roll off my back.
I know, right? Yeah. It's really important to be positive. But at some level, it's true. I mean, retroviruses, all of these integrate into the DNA. And if they integrate in a tumor suppressor or in front of a proto-oncogene, they can make changes to your genetics, cause mutations that are going to cause cancer. Now, your body has a surveillance system to kill cancerous cells, but if you get enough of these that have these weird mutations, eventually one is going to, mutate and become a tumor, and it might metastasize from there. So, the concern is very deep and very real, and it's not being addressed. And so that's one of the things that we definitely need more real-time research to address, how we can shut these down, how we can help to also increase our surveillance system so that our bodies are identifying and killing off cancer. People don't realize your immune system is key in recognizing and destroying cancerous cells. So if you dysregulate it by giving all of these weird injections that dysregulate the immune system, which we know that they do, then you're really just setting up a perfect storm. Kids never got cancer when we were kids. You didn't hear about it.
Never saw it, never heard of it.
It was so rare.
Nope.
And
yeah, it was very rare.
We don't realize that it was because their immune systems are really strong. And so we've gone and we've given them so many injections that dysregulate their immune system. And then we're shocked when their immune system is, not catching these cancerous cells.
16 years ago, Austin, Texas didn't even have a children's hospital.
Wow. And
That's
now
how rare those cancers still were. And now there's a children's hospital in every major city in this country.
We have a very small community, and we have the elementary, the middle school, and the high school all in one building. And it's still about 300 children for all of it. And at any one time, when I was working there and my kids were in school briefly there, they had like 3 cancer cases. Like always, like 3 cancer cases, 1 in 100. That is such a high rate.
That's a high rate.
That's a high rate
for children.
Now we're doing this emergency use of something that hasn't had enough clinical trials, that has been injected into adults. We don't know enough information. And I have people calling me now and saying, well, what's wrong with snake venom? Isn't that what they use for antibiotics? So what's the problem? I've got people calling me asking me these questions about
the problem isn't at all necessarily that they've used snake venom, although I think there's always informed consent. Many of us prefer to stay away from pharmaceuticals because, like, you're playing God. You're like, I think this is going to work. Where if it's something that's natural, I'm like, God designed this. I trust his design better than yours. As smart as you might be, I think he's smarter in doing things like turmeric or, milk thistle or some of these nature provided things than we are in like mobilizing snake venom to treat somebody. Now, but I'm not a purist. If my daughter has seizures, so she's on seizure meds, I would prefer her to be natural. But if I can't find something, I'll use a pharmaceutical. But, I don't have a problem with that. But the question is, what is the intent of this? One, if the intent weren't nefarious, there were a lot of pro-vaccine doctors saying, why are you using the whole spike protein? Why are you doing that? Because anybody with any scientific background at all could see the direction this was going was extremely dangerous.
Right.
And that's bearing out, by many multiple mechanisms, that the spike protein is just extremely, extremely toxic.
Well, that was, see, that's what I really liked about your response, because you were like, okay, before we even get to the snake venom, I mean, look at all the things that we know for a fact. Like, this is not just a theory, but we know, like the glyphosate in the food, and you name some other things that we know that we should have a problem with.
Right, and that was my other big point, is the glyphosate, which is the key ingredient in Roundup, that is sprayed on all our food, and not just the GMO foods. It's sprayed as a drying agent on all legumes, all beans. A lot of people, my sister was eating hummus when she was pregnant, thinking she was doing something great for herself. And then her son, who was unvaccinated, had so many health problems. That's when I did a deep dive into glyphosate. And I think it's one of the most toxic, insidious chemicals on earth, partly because it doesn't kill you right away. If it killed you right away, people wouldn't take it. It's a slow death. And it is, I was just reading some papers that were showing, I think it was in fish and tilapia, that basically it upregulated inflammation. It downregulated our body's key antioxidant response pathways, which is the NRF2, the superoxide dismutase, the catalase. What those do is those mop up free radicals and prevent inflammation. Inflammation drives every major disease. And so if glyphosate is changing our systems, we know it destroys our positive microbiome and allows actually pathogenic different bacteria to overgrow. And so it has so many mechanisms by which it is so destructive. And what it is doing is, we all have a threshold beyond. If we stay below this threshold, we're okay. If we get above it, we launch into disease. And once we do that, it just, everything sort of devolves in sort of a domino-like effect. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And glyphosate is really lowering that threshold. So more of us are getting to that point where our health just devolves, where something like even a car accident, an injection, a vaccine, a viral infection can just cause mold. Anything can cause us to go and spiral, and all of these systems spiral down because your body's protective mechanisms have been shut down or shut off, and then everything goes haywire. Beyond that, the vaccinations are so much more dangerous because they're actually dysregulating your immune system, which is what keeps you healthy, which is what keeps things on track. So it's just such a perfect storm, and that all of that inflammation is using up your vitamin D, using up your antioxidants. So many people are just right on the cusp. And I have doctors and practitioners calling me and saying, I have never seen this level of disease and death. I'm up till 2 a.m. I don't know what to do. I don't even know what to do with these patients because they've spiraled out of control. And once the body is at a certain level of dysregulation, it's really hard to stabilize. And I'm seeing very, very desperate practitioners at this point, where they've gone from sort of this sort of chronic but livable disease to people that you're afraid aren't going to make it because their body's so dysregulated. And so that's why I've called for a Vaccine Injury Treatment Alliance. We've got to get our best minds on this and see what we can figure out, what's working.
Well, tell us more about the Vaccine Alliance group. What is that about, and what is your intent with it?
So as a scientist, I'm not an administrator, but luckily I've had some wonderful administrators come on board. I saw that a lot of us were working in isolation, and one of the practitioners called me today. She said, I'm overwhelmed, but I feel isolated. I've got these cases I don't know what to do with, and who can I talk to? So the first is to bring the practitioners together to just find in real time what's working, because when people are being injured, we don't have to know all the science. If vitamin D is working, or vitamin C is working, or fasting is working, and with what kind of patients is it working? Okay. Yes. What's working, what's not working, so that we can at least get some protocols. We can get diagnostics. As you well know, Sheila, many people are so gaslighted. They go to the doctors, they do a battery of tests that they think are appropriate, which don't check for autoimmunity, don't check for mast cell activation, don't check for all of these problems that we in the community know are rampant. And so we want diagnostics so that when they go to their doctor, they can say, oh, this is way off. Oh, you do have an autoimmune disorder or whatever it is. So that they can stop being gaslighted, one.
Right.
And two, then to form working groups of people in specific areas of expertise who can then develop both protocols and share knowledge with other practitioners. And so this will probably start in sort of this more closed group of scientists and practitioners that are very, very aware of vaccine injury. But then it's going to go to the broader community where we can educate doctors, because the truth is that many things that can trigger trigger what we call vaccine injury can also be caused by other thresholds of toxins or whatever. So things like POTS, which is where you can't stand up without passing out. Things like PANDAS, where it's an autoimmune, where antibodies to the strep virus are attacking the brain, or other strep bacteria. Excuse me, I misspoke. Or other bacteria or whatever it is. So there are many different conditions, whether it's myocarditis or things that may or may not have manifested as a result of an injection. But if they have the same etiology, then we can train those doctors to treat that when they see it. And what diagnostics you need to use to identify it, and what are some potential treatment modalities that will help. And then we are launching a website that will be up shortly. It's our name is Vita, or Vita, however you want to say it. I'm not of Latin origin. Of course, it means life, right? We're not going to talk about injury anymore. We're going to talk about how to bring life. And so it's Vaccine Injury Treatment Alliance. And again, beyond that, we want to move to more globally, making how to heal from this toxic load and the glyphosate, because it's all related. Gut health is so central, and improving our gut health is something everyone can benefit to, whether they're injured or not.
Well, what you're talking about, Christina, I've been on a 22-year journey, and I can tell you there's so many practitioners, especially with the vaccine injury called autism. This is the road we've been down. We have seen it all. And the majority of those doctors who stood by us with the testing that was what we needed, right, while everyone was saying this is not evidence-based and you can't do anything with this, and the money, the thousands upon hundreds of thousands of dollars that we've had to spend as parents, that really has broken families, just to get here and see that, you know what? All of this information has always been here, but we've never had anyone who was willing, or any funding from any organization or institution willing to put it to the test to see what had happened to our children.
Right. And that's where, unfortunately, because of the level of destruction, it's woken enough people up that hopefully we can get enough support to actually fund some things that have not been funded before, and to actually have the will for doctors to learn these new modalities. So as someone, I think it was really important, and one of the reasons I stepped up is because I understood that there was something going on. I didn't gaslight the parents, even though I didn't know what it was. I wasn't going to tell them that it wasn't true. So I spent like 5 years looking into the mechanism of sort of what would be known as traditional vaccine injury, whether it was aluminum-based or autoimmunity or whatever, because we can't fix it. We can't help our kids until we know what's wrong. And now there's a lot of people who are very, very interested in treating COVID vaccine injury, and it certainly is a very pressing problem because of the level of dysfunction and disease that they're seeing. But the healing modalities that were used are probably ones that were understood better by sort of the older school practitioners. And so you need someone that understands both worlds to understand what have we been doing, but also the science of how the COVID injury is different and how the etiology of that is different. And so you really have to understand all of the science at a very basic level in terms of like the molecular biology, the biochemistry. And then you've also got to see what's working in reality with the practitioners, what's actually working. So we want to bring all of that together. And I think it's really important to bring the old school and the new school together, and in a spirit of humility.
Well, and it's not just old school. We're still seeing children being damaged just from the childhood vaccine schedule. That hasn't changed.
No, and now they want to give them the COVID vaccine. So
Right.
I think hopefully, I'm hoping one of the blessings of this is the information that we're going to be disseminating isn't just about COVID injections. It's more broadly based because we know healing the gut is going to help all our kids. We know, that you can remove aluminum by drinking, Fiji water.
Right.
So some of these more simple, because even if you have a COVID vaccine injury, it was your threshold. Maybe you were a nurse and you had been getting DTaP and the flu vaccine, and maybe you had aluminum overload. Maybe you had mercury in there. Do you know what I'm saying? So
Yes.
many of the issues are similar that got them to that threshold. And I'm hoping, and it's certainly my goal, that this is much broader than just COVID injection injury or post-COVID syndrome, which, since they're both caused by the spike protein, manifests in many similar ways.
Well, in Texas, we've been working on legislation for years for the right to try. And there's a group here run by Sheila that has done everything that they can to protect doctors' licenses. Because the minute you start openly doing these protocols, you take a risk of having your license removed.
I know, and I've just been asked today to testify for someone. Yeah.
So
Yeah, and then there's somebody else that I'm on a court case for that is being sued by the government for promoting just regular supplements to boost your immune system.
What?
So,
yes,
this is just insane.
That's common. And we find that we've had to have an underground network of doctors. We still have an underground network of doctors, those of us with these really injured children. We now have to have a network of doctors, underground doctors, for those of us who are dealing with cancer, and we don't care to do mainstream. It is the most, I don't even have a word to describe what we go through and the stress that it brings for what we deal with if you decide to step outside of insurance and outside of conventional, what they call it, standard care of treatment.
It's crazy that the healthcare system has become tyrannical. Well, we're talking about healthcare, right? We're talking about people that
was intentional. That was intentional.
Right.
I mean, that was the federal government takeover where, they said, Obamacare is to help that poor single parent. No, it is not helping that poor single parent. It was to get federal dollars. And the first thing that they did was say, hey, you're not going to get your Medicare or Medicare paid payments unless you make sure 95% of your staff and your patients are vaccinated.
Right.
Because we have, our government and everybody else is captured by big pharma, and who else knows whatever globalist players are behind it. But,
you can't get an organ transplant in this country anymore unless you're vaccinated. It's the saddest thing. I watched in New Orleans a 23-year-old autistic man die because he was on the liver transplant list since a little boy. And every time he would go in, a liver would come up. They would give him a flu vaccine. And he'd get sick and couldn't get the liver, and the liver would go to someone else. Well, at 23, when he went in to get, liver came up for him again. They gave him the flu vaccine. He died. And in my heart, I felt very certain that was because they didn't deem him worthy. Now, this happened about 8 years ago. But since then, I've watched typical people right here in the state of Texas go in to get a kidney or a liver transplant and could not get it unless they got vaccinated. And I watched a 33-year-old young man with all of his life ahead of him, typical man, die because he refused to take the flu vaccine.
Yeah. This is a huge issue. I know, 2 people personally, and they're young children that need transplants that can't get them without the vaccines. And it's horrific because you're like, how much damage are you going to do by getting the vaccine? But they need that organ transplant as well. And I think there's a case that I was just going to see if I could promote. I don't have the details right now in front of me, but another one where I think a young girl or lady needs a kidney transplant and can't get it without getting vaccinated. And and the thing is, I guess what bothers me about so many things is it's cowardice. If everyone stood up, like some of these doctors know better. Do you know what I mean? They know that at least it's not necessary, right? Even if, but everyone is just following the rules. And of people of African descent, why was segregation allowed to last so long? It was because everyone just followed the rules. It wasn't because this person or that white person or whatever was racist. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. It was because everybody followed the rules. And so you have to look at who put those rules in place and for what purpose.
Exactly.
And if we don't have the courage to stand up against the rules, and we always look back at like Nazi Germany or wherever and say, how could they have allowed that to happen?
The same way
everyone was just following the rules, and nobody wanted to be that one person that stood out and got ostracized or dragged off or put in prison or whatever, lost their job, whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And when we allow people to die in the hospitals because we're not going to give them FDA-approved drugs for safety like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, when we don't give them what we know is the highest standard of care and instead follow some little standard of care that came down from on high, then we're lost our humanity.
Well, even going through what I've gone through the last almost 4 years, I went to one of the most world-renowned cancer research facilities in this country, and who told me I had to try standard care treatment first. I said, no, I don't want to do that. Your research facility, you mean tell me in all of this research facility you don't have anything else that you can use to help me overcome this? And they said no. Those were their words to me. While I watched friends, a lot of women friends, die in that same research facility from standard care treatment. And then I went to 6 other facilities and heard the same thing. I had a couple of doctors who were willing to try something else, but told me because of all of the conditions that I had, it wouldn't make it off of the table, so they wouldn't take the risk. So you do have doctors out here who probably would be willing to do something, who would be willing to put their license on the line, but we just don't have enough who are willing to stand up. And I think that without putting blame to all of these doctors, if you're taught that you need to take a hypothesis and you need to put it to a test, and you need to be doing, first, do no harm, and you need to be doing care that is evidence-based, how are you going to do that if you don't have enough tests out here? I mean, you don't have enough science out here, enough research out here, and you do not have enough outside independent studies to show you both sides. How are you supposed to do that? So I don't always blame the doctors, because a lot have left the country. They're doing things in other places, trying to help people overcome. But you have such a small population who can afford to leave this country and do what they need to do, or even afford to stay here and do something outside the realm of insurance.
And that's one of the things that we want to do is take some of these healing modalities like hyperbaric, and they could be made affordable. So and that's where we just need, but this is maybe a critical time when people are woken up enough to be willing to invest in such a system, because obviously a system like that is going to require investment and heavy investment. And not only that, it's going to require enormous legal support.
And that's one of the reasons it's a good idea to get with those of us who've been on this journey for 20 years, because a lot of us have had hyperbaric chambers in our homes. You know, all the doctors. And we've got, all of the people that have gone before us and, did their best to help us with our children. But what I've discovered along this journey is not enough to have all of that if you don't have true genetic testing. Because I had no idea of some of the genetic issues that I have and I've passed on to my children. And the epigenetics part of that, the vaccines pulled that trigger.
Right. And I think that's, where I'm hoping that God will use me, because I feel that I really have an understanding of all the different things that need to be integrated to give best quality of care. It's kind of funny. You often hear practitioners saying, oh, I'm having great success with this or success with that. What I get is the patients, the people coming to me saying nothing is working, nothing is working, nothing is working. So I really have a very core understanding, and then they proceed to tell me everything, some of which I understand, some of which I don't. So I don't understand the clinical testing that they do, but and it's complicated. It's really, really complicated, and you have to bring everything to the table to be able to handle these.
So you need like that mastermind group that you're putting together.
And so that's the idea: is what does this integrated care look like, and how can we standardize it? Like what diagnostics, what tests, so that we can put you in the right group where you need to be, get you the genetic testing. And it should be as far from this little diagram of care that they have now, where they A, B, C, and here's your treatment, right, as you can get, where people actually understand, like, a mast cell activation can be histamine, it can be other things, but we need to understand what can you do to reduce histamine, because there are natural methods, there are pharmaceuticals, but there's some people who have mast cell activation and they're allergic to Benadryl, which should shut down histamine, so it's complicated. And we have to do justice to the pain of people. Like the two of you are familiar with McDowell triplets, and I spent 4 hours with their parents asking every question I could think of. And it's complicated. And where everyone wants to be optimistic that they have improved the health of their children through hundreds of thousands of dollars of treatments, they still haven't reached an optimal quality of life by any stretch of the imagination. And a lot of things are trial and error instead of really digging into the science, figuring out what's going on, and treating based on that.
Exactly. Because I know some of the modalities that if I'd used on my son, it would have killed him. I didn't know he had G6PD deficiency.
Right.
Yes, primary.
And most of us have not been tested. I've never been tested.
Right.
When I was trying to help my dad through COVID, I was like, does he have that? And he was on several medications that said, don't use if you're on that, and I'm like, well, am I going to keep him on those medications and put him on hydroxychloroquine, which can be problematic if you have that, right? And so, and it's like, where are the doctors? Where are the people who, like, we should have this knowledge base. I shouldn't have to be guessing, what's going on with him. But I'm sure he'd never been tested either. And he passed on, but in the frustration of not having the resources, knowing what needs to be done, but not having the resources to get it done
and so many of us have that. And I was shocked to find out in all of the years and all of the thousands of people that I've met, they test for PKU of newborns in the hospital. I've only met one parent whose twins were diagnosed with PKU. One out of thousands.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I've met any that told me anyway.
One. And his twins are a year older than my twins. They're 23. Mm-hmm. And he knew at that moment when he went and looked it up not to vaccinate them. And that is the only, and they can't eat protein. And it's the only reason his children are in college and thriving. However, how many of our children have G6PD deficiency? My son does, and he was hit hard. And you look at these.
Guess what glyphosate does? It affects G6PD. So it's one more insult to a system that's barely staying above water as it is.
Right.
I want to circle back to something you said earlier.
At birth affects G6PD. Nobody talks about it.
Yeah. Wow.
A baby should never have that unless you know. Nothing should go into a newborn. Absolutely.
Right, exactly. I want to circle back to something you said, because I know that it impacts a lot of people, and particularly our audience too, right? Because a lot of people follow the SABI diet, right, of eating alkaline, and that means chickpeas.
Yeah, chickpeas are high in omega-6s. They're actually quite inflammatory, and they have astronomical levels of glyphosate. You should only ever eat, organic chickpeas from a verified, American source. Because
so that's really important. Then it's not like you could
lentils,
like the regular one
also have astronomical, and oats have very high.
So wait a minute, you said lentils and oats
are astronomical. Oats are very, very high.
And the problem is, if you have G6PD, you shouldn't eat any beans, any legumes.
Right. Probably
You shouldn't
not.
touch them. You really shouldn't. I never forget. I wanted to see because Dr. Stephanie Seneff, I talked to her at length, and she had talked to me about glyphosates, and she was telling me all these different things. So I was in Pennsylvania, and I had a friend. I said, I want you to take me to the Amish farms. I want to see what the farms look like. So we drove hours to get to the farms. I get to the farms, and lo and behold, on that day, I mean, just beautiful farms that look so ancient and so beautiful. And you got the Amish farms over here, huge highway, and on this side you have the conventional farms because it's all farmland.
Yeah.
Just as I'm looking at all of this beautiful farmland, I'm watching him with his ancestry plow with no wheels on it, doing what he does. Here comes the crop duster with the glyphosates on the conventional side, all the way down, spraying, and I'm watching the wind take it to the organic.
Oh, that's so terrible.
And that's when I realized, is it possible that we really don't have organic foods unless you're growing them yourself?
Right. Well, even then, I mean, there was somebody, we don't generally see crop dusters around ours, so if they're spraying, it's usually on their field, but still the wind can blow it, and you get a lot of that. But somebody was crop dusting something, and it's like right by my trees, and I'm like growing everything organic. I mean, you do the best you can, for sure.
Right.
But yeah, it's and the Amish aren't as they eat terribly. They eat white bread and potato chips, and I mean, they grow their own food, so maybe they're avoiding a lot of the toxins, but they're not necessarily sort of the back to nature people that you might think that they are. And I mean, they're lovely people. I'm not saying that, but
no, I don't know anything about them personally. I just wanted to see the farms because they were bragging. My friends in the Pennsylvania area, they were bragging about these beautiful organic crops, and then go to the farmers market, to their markets. Because they have a farmers market every Saturday, and buy their produce from them. So I wanted to see it, and that's what I got to see. The week
I live out here in farmland, and this time of year I'll go around and say, okay, they just sprayed that with glyphosate because everything died in it with Roundup, because they'll often spray the fields before they plant to kill all the weeds or whatever. So I mean, it's and then when you live in that farming community, how much you expose just by that. So there's and with the glyphosate, experiments have shown that it changes the epigenetics, so that even if you stop using it, it changes your epigenetics, and then your children's epigenetics, and their children's epigenetics, 3 generations down.
That's
and the
terrible.
3rd generation is the most mutated. So this is why those of us who are eating glyphosate seem to be minimally affected in general. Our children are ill, and their children are super, super ill. And it seems like sometimes on TV every day, it's like, oh, this person has this rare, they'll say sometimes genetic, but they have this rare condition. Well, it's because glyphosate turns on an enzyme called TET3 that spontaneously just goes around and changes our epigenetics, that it demethylates something, but it does it randomly, not in the ordered way it's supposed to be done. So it's just mutating which genes are supposed to be on and which genes are supposed to be off. And so it's just like, oh my gosh, this is an existential threat here.
It is. But you know what? I remember years ago, this is probably maybe in the 80s or something, that there were scientists coming on TV at that time talking about, this is maybe when glyphosate first started to be used. And they were saying that it would be multi-generational, and people were just like, oh, like nobody was it. Like
our government would never lie to us.
Outcry that should have, because it was on TV at the time. Yeah. They were getting airtime, and people just didn't have this concept that we have a responsibility down the line. If it's not going to impact me, then why do I care, right? Like, what about your kids and your kids' kids?
Because in the 50s, we're no longer an agrarian society. In the 50s, they paid the farmers to stop farming, and they went to these mass production farms.
Right.
So people don't understand this. You're not raised with this concept anymore.
I think people felt that they still had enough power that if something was bad, that it would be dealt with. But now we know where we've gone to mass agriculture, big pharma, big ag, and globalist power. Like, in my township, big marijuana has moved in. This is not small local growers trying to make CBD to
This is
help children with
big
seizures. This
marijuana
is a
too.
multinational
Right.
conglomerate that basically, as far as I'm concerned, drug dealers. So they're bringing in control. It's not that they're just bringing in even just growing marijuana or whatever. They're bringing in their money and their absolute control. And so I don't think people realize that when they ceded their power, when we ceded our power and allowed the 1986 Act to remove liability for all vaccines on the childhood schedule, that created an environment that funded big pharma so that they could become this monstrosity that seems beyond control, that we can't seem to rein in.
They never made money before then, and they couldn't even get insurance. That's why they got that act. But in 2011, I had a lawsuit against Merck because there was a loophole you could still go through. And we were I had a private lawsuit against them, and then I was in the big omnibus lawsuit of the 5,000 children. They took that case to the Supreme Court in 2011, and the Supreme Court of this country stated vaccines are unavoidably unsafe and closed the loophole. So when our power was given away at that moment completely. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Big Pharma has absolute power. And that is the problem we're running into. And now they're trying to get that emergency use on the childhood schedule so that they will not have liability for it. And that's why they've kept this EU going all of this time. There's no reason for an emergency use to still be on the schedule. They need to get that jab on the schedule so that they will not be liable for the damage they've done.
And there was another one too, another big change that happened, and I can't remember the name of the law that allowed pharmaceutical to advertise
only
their
here in
drugs.
New Zealand. Only here in New
Zealand. So that they can control the media.
Right. So basically they're the biggest advertisers now because they've got the biggest budget. And that was a biggie right there because back then you could actually get on TV and say something. Now you
and now you can't. It's so censored. And I think I think this is like where states' rights are so important because I heard that Tennessee just made things like hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, I can't remember which, available over the counter. And so I'm sure FLCCC I think played a big role in that, in testifying. And so where one state goes, another state may follow as well. But if there are bastions of freedom, that's where we can maybe get a foothold in there because, the big ag and the big pharma, they control the federal government. But if we can get some small footholds and people are going to move, they're going to put their resources where the freedom is. And so if we can get some places that either have laws or opportunities to start these new alternative health freedom and then possibly, make them available across state borders, or there will be such a demand that it's going to be obvious and then people will hop on board to make money or whatever it is.
Well, that's why it's important for people to join these local groups. I know Bernadette Payer personally. She moved from Seattle and she moved to Tennessee, and she was instrumental. She got an accommodation from the state legislators for that bill because she helped to write that bill and she helped to bring the doctors in. She used Children's Health Defense, Stand for Health Freedom, and all of the local groups there to get ivermectin on over the counter. Because you can go right to Mexico and buy as much ivermectin as you want. You just walk into a drugstore, which there are 2 on every corner, and get all of the ivermectin that you ever wanted, any other drug, even hypertensive medicine. You don't need a prescription for it. But yet, those medications are kept from us. I mean, before, ivermectin isn't new. I've been using it. You talk about the horse paste and all of that. You can't even go in a feed store anymore and buy the horse paste unless they want to know if it's for horses. What kind of freedom is that? It's none of their business. what it's for. But people have got to join these groups. You've got to get on board. You've got to make your voice known, because states are sovereign. If you can keep your state sovereign, then you can keep your family free. We don't have the freedom that's touted about at the White House and around the world in this country. And freedom is not something that is a given. It's something that you have to demand, you have to work to keep. You
And be
fight.
willing to take responsibility for it too.
Right. And I know Bernadette as well, because we were in some working groups together. And so many of these people's, again, this is why I stepped up. I know there's so many people that have been working behind the scenes, and many people want to step forward and do something flashy to act like that's going to make a difference. When really a lot of that, I'm not saying it doesn't have a place, but it can be wasted time and effort, where we really need to say what is going to make the biggest difference. And something like what Bernadette has done is one of those things. And so I know, and it really encourages me that one person behind the scenes can coordinate enough to make a difference. And because that's what I hope to do as well. And to realize that the people who are working behind the scenes are not the names that you may know, but are extremely critical.
That's right.
That's a very good point you made there, actually, because I even see here in New Jersey that it's not the big flashy people you see in front of the cameras that made the biggest difference of why. I mean, not that all of us didn't make a difference being out there screaming and banging whatever when the day came, but there were people working behind the scenes every day, like literally, like going to the state house, like they were living down there and having these meetings, backdoor meetings with legislators and stuff like that, and all kinds of other stuff. And you don't know their names. You know what I mean? Like they're not the people you know.
That's what makes the difference. It's got to be the constituents in that state.
Right.
You got to have a relationship with those legislators. They work for you. You don't work for them. You're not here for them to dictate what's going on. They work for you. So you have to develop relationships, whether you care for them or not. Knock on those doors and stay in those offices and do the research, bring the information in, because it is best for, at the end of that day, for you to be able to say, they can never say they didn't know the truth, because the truth was presented all along. Bernadette had been in.
And eventually that's what's going to reach a critical threshold where enough people know that it's not going to fly anymore. And I think, I know people are saying like something like, oh, well, you're so well known now or whatever. And but the thing was, in that, like the testimony that I did, like everyone acts like it's such a big deal, the one that went viral, I'm like, that was just the same work, different day.
Right.
You know, I didn't know that was going to go viral. It was just doing the same old thing again and again and again. I mean, not the same exact thing, but you know what I mean? It was just showing up again and again and again. I had no idea that was going to go viral. It's not like afterwards I was like, oh, I'm famous now or whatever. I mean, no.
Oh, no, Christina, I can tell you, there have been so few of us out here until when you see somebody like you on the screen telling the truth without fear or trepidation, it's like, woo, there goes the radar. Go get him. Get him on the team.
I've
been speaking out so long, and I was so censored, you know, that it certainly.
Well, there's another. Yeah. The censorship, because they didn't want people to know you were there.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, but we know.
We know.
We know now.
Those of us lurking in the halls, capturing everything. I'm telling you, it's been a long journey, and we got a long way to go, but we're getting there. You know, we're getting there state by state. That's the only way to do it. You've got to do it state by state. You're not going to make a difference federally. I knew William Thompson would never be subpoenaed. And anybody still waiting and calling for him to be subpoenaed can stop. I knew from the beginning. But what he said was the truth. And I felt vindicated because I'd been shut down so many times. And what we do now is we keep our states sovereign where you live. If your footprint matters where you are, then it can matter somewhere else if someone sees what you've done. And that's the way we win this war, because this is a war. We're at war.
Yeah.
We're at war for the very civilization of life. Our very existence. And it's not getting any better. We've got so many assaults now. We really do.
I know. You feel overwhelmed. It's coming from all sides. So
from the food you eat. I mean, even now They've dropped pellets. You've got a lot of hunters here in Texas, survivors. People just hunt. They like to eat wild game. I've never heard of wild game needing rabies pellets dropped from the sky. Ever. I've never heard that. And yet that's what they're doing, and they're ruining
Lord have
wild
mercy.
game. I mean, it's horrible what's happening, and nobody voted on it.
Yeah.
It wasn't brought to anyone's attention. This is something they just decided to do.
Right.
So if you destroy all the food supply in the food chain, what are people going to do? And there really are food shortages now. There's shortages down.
That's the plan. That's the plan.
We don't have it here yet in Texas because you got a lot of farms. You got a big market, HEB. They only buy local. But right in Louisiana, they already have food shortages because you don't have the farms anymore. You have people growing small amounts of food, but they are importing everything in.
Yep.
And that was the end game.
They want control.
That's right. The end game from the beginning.
Right. So we're running out of time. I mean, there's so many things we could cover, and we're going to have to do this again. Dr. Parks, you have to come back. There's so many things we need to cover.
Thank you for what you're doing too.
Yes, and I wanna make sure I put it up on screen. Your website for the Vaccine Injury Treatment Alliance.
I'm gonna have to get it. We haven't. I mean, it's not up yet. So
it's not up yet, but maybe
by that. We've just gotten the domain names, so I will get you that information and hopefully a screenshot of the page as soon as we get that up and running. But we're hoping to launch in a few weeks, and I'll keep you updated. And maybe we can do a short little thing when we do get it launched.
Yes, definitely. And let me know when it can go in the show notes here. Is it will it be vita.com?
It'll be vi-ta.org. vi-ta.org or vaccineinjury-treatmentalliance.org.
Now, how can people support you, Dr. Parks? How can they reach out and support this effort?
Once we get that page up, we will have a button for donations, for contributions. Not donations, contributions.
Is that right?
So,
vi-ta.org.
That will be
okay. So it's not up now, right now.
It's not up yet. No,
but it will be.
The domain. It will be within the next few weeks, and
depending on when you watch this. If you watch this,
let us know.
That's why I'm putting it up there.
Right.
Yeah, let us know so we can put the links and we'll come back too.
Yeah, and you can pray.
We'll pray about it.
Absolutely.
There's another group doing the same thing, and there's so many doctors who would really appreciate having.
Well, we're pulling them together. We're trying to get them together because we need each other. We need to bounce ideas and get those working groups and everything. And it's not about being exclusive. It's just about someone doing the coordinating to help people out as we're all so busy.
Right. So I'm glad you're in this work with us.
Me too.
So I really am. Yeah. So that was great. I mean, she dropped some really powerful ideas. And I think at this point, people are going to have to really start thinking about what matters.
They are. But you know what? I think there are a lot of people who think about what matters, but they do not have the resources to make it happen. I mean, you pay into an insurance, and this is why the Obamacare pretty much if you don't pay into health care, you get penalized, which never should happen.
That shouldn't have happened, no.
Yeah, it's your right not to pay into an insurance coverage if you don't want it.
Right.
Because people can save their own money. Yeah, they can draw interest on their own money. They should be able to pull down money that they've saved to provide for the type of health care that they want. Right. We don't have the right to try in this country, and we deserve that.
Right. I agree.
And no one should dictate to us how that goes.
Right.
And when you look at it, you think, oh, goodness, integrative medicine is so expensive. No, it's not.
Not in comparison. No, it's actually not.
Because when you look at what you pay for premiums, what you pay for your insurance, to have insurance for a year, if something were to happen, you look at what insurance pays out and what your copay is, or your 20%, 30%. Some people have even higher deductibles than that. You pretty much paid it out, but now you're in debt because you're still paying this high premium. You got to pay the hospital back for all the surgeries and what have you that you've had. Suppose you had that money to yourself, and you could get the type of treatment that you want from a reputable doctor.
Exactly. You actually had choice.
That's right, because you have the right to try.
Right.
You have choice.
Right.
It's got to change.
It does. It really does. It really does. It's ridiculous.
It really is.
So, audience, we want to know what you think. Reach out to us. Email us at wyv@protonmail.com. Leave comments. Come to our website, myblackhealth.com. Leave comments on that page. This will more than likely go up on Rumble. So this is where you'll find this tape. Just reach out, leave comments, let us know what you think. We want to know what your view is. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye, everyone.